Welcome, everybody, to the Weekly Grind Podcast, episode number 77. I am your host, Keith Fabry, with my co-host, Tommy Styles, and IFBB Pro, Dr. Todd Lee. Guys, welcome back.
Hello.
How are we?
Tommy, welcome back. Been a long time, man.
Yeah, good to be back.
All right, guys, with us tonight, special guest, we have IFBB Pro and top 4 212 Olympian, Mr. John Jewett. John, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, guys. I appreciate the invite on.
Yeah, no problem. I've been looking at getting you on for a while. When I started going through my list of people that I wanted to get on and talk to and stuff, you're always one of the ones I come back to and stuff and look, and we finally was able to reach out to you, get a hold of you, and have you come on the show. So I'm excited to have this because you got extensive knowledge in diet and training and stuff, and we just love to talk about that stuff. So this will be a good one.
If I don't know it, I'll just make it up for you.
We do it all the time. It's fine. So, John, obviously you're an IFBB Pro. Why don't you give us a little bit background about, how you got started training and into bodybuilding and stuff, and some of your contest history and background.
Yeah, and it's not to not make it too long. I've just a kid, always been athletics, did a little bit of mix of everything growing up, from track, football, baseball, just nothing really connected well till I got into high school and started lifting. I'm like, hell yeah, I'm kind of stronger than everyone. And then I realized that there was actually here in Texas powerlifting, and they had it in some high schools, but not my high school. We're a big 5A high school, and it was all about football. So
right.
It was like a lot of the South Side schools had like wrestling and powerlifting. So I linked up with a group of guys that were training at a local gym, powerlifting. They were older. They were in their 40s, and guys were benching like 600 pounds. It was just a whole nother world to me, because I was like the strong guy at high school benching like 275, and then I step into this a new world of guys I just didn't even know you could lift that much. So that's what broke me like into powerlifting, and I did that for 8 years. If you call me a powerlifter at first, because I was like doing bench press only. So in the powerlifting world, they, if you're a full meet guy, you kind of give the bench specialist like some shit.
Right.
But I did do some full meets in college as well, and so it's some good strength feats in it. And it was like all single ply back then. That was like the really in thing, and raw has kind of come back now. But I did like my best bench was a 706 at 220. And for full meet, my best total was an 1820. So that was a little over 600-pound squat deadlift, and bench was like 634 at that meet. So
okay, that's good. That's really good.
Yeah, it was good then. I can't lift like that anymore.
No.
Training changed, but yeah, that's after I was, I thought I would be really big by then. Strength was on the forefront of like what I really enjoyed. But I just didn't quite look the part. And so I always had bodybuilding on the back burner in my mind. So after college, I decided, let me get into bodybuilding. So I was around 25 then, trained for a year, and did my first show. And so I've been bodybuilding now for the past 7 years. Turned pro at the 2016 USA's as a heavyweight. And the big story people like to hear is like the year prior I was a middleweight, so I made a huge jump in weight class, which I was more like a really squeezed down light heavyweight to middleweight. So, but regardless, there was a big growth here for me, and then have just been doing 212 shows since then. This past year was a big breakout year for me, doing third in Chicago. Then I won the Tampa Pro, and then went to Olympia and got fourth, and so here we are now.
Right.
4 weeks out from the 2020 Olympia.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you kind of got a little bit of a similar background as far as starters for what I had, because it was for me, it was sports, and then sports went away. I got too old. Hey, I want to do something. Let me power lift. I power lifted for I think 5 years. I did what's known as classic raw. So you could use wrist wraps, belt, elbow sleeves, that was knee sleeves, that was you were allowed to use for the classic raw. Not as nearly as strong as you. That's even my best was 512 and a half. That was the best bench I ever had on that. I was a little bit old. I was 30 or 31 when I did that.
And that was raw though. Like,
Yeah, but my
that's
body was
legit.
breaking down, dude. 2 weeks
Yeah.
later, I couldn't lift my arms above my head, so it didn't matter. My shoulders were going on me pretty quick. So I transitioned into bodybuilding really, really late after that, and then so yeah, it's kind of like the same. When you said powerlifting, I was like, okay, yeah, I can see that because you have a very, very dense frame, small waist. I mean, you've got great shape and everything, but if you look at your frame and stuff, you've got a very, very dense look for how much you actually weigh. So you can usually pick the power lifters out.
Yeah. First show was great coming in because I had just already had like a great base of muscle. Just a few things were lagging. Stuff you like. I never did a lateral raise in powerlifting. Like, why the hell would I do a lateral raise?
Right.
You know? So, but yeah, definitely give me a good base and tissue that would just really stick around.
Yeah. So you said you're 4 weeks out from the O. How's that prep going with all this 2020 crazy bullshit going on?
It's been fine. I started prep 20. I was 20 weeks out from when it was supposed to be in September. So I was dieting, and it's like, okay, well, we'll just go back into kind of cruise mode and
Yep.
pick it back up. It's in a way nice being 212 because for me, like I'm at the cusp of the weight cutoff anyway. So it's easy just to hold a higher body weight, and I'm not trying to like be like some of the other guys that like trying to really push and like grow into the show.
Right.
Or having to go to other extremes that it might be to stay on a prep for that long. So from a health aspect, it's a little easier. But for this show, it's quite a different situation because last year I was on prep for a little over 30 weeks, and going into Olympia, like I was already shredded down, just kind of cruising into the show. So this one's trying to, pull back down, and body's been a little bit stubborn, honestly, coming into this prep, but I've made up a lot of ground these past few weeks. So overall, feel really good about it. And they actually just announced it today, if y'all didn't see it, that the Olympia is going to be in Orlando.
Yeah.
So wherever we got to go, just have the show up. It's in a backyard or whatever.
Hey, I competed at the Michigan State in a fucking parking lot this year. Okay, so it happens. Hey, whatever you got to do. Whatever you got to do to get the show in. It's been a mess. I mean, this state they just canceled what was supposed to be the last show of the year that was supposed to be back in September. They got pushed back into December. They just canceled and postponed it to the spring. So governor orders again up here with our wonderful governor. She's shut shit down once again for no reason. So
I think it's pretty much, if you want to bodybuild, you have to move to Florida. It's like that is like our our sanctioned state for bodybuilding now.
And I was just down there visiting Justin Compton. So I was in the Jacksonville area, and you're right. There's nothing is shut down there. They don't give a shit about anything. You can just walk into any store. Nobody says a word to you about if you don't have a mask on. They don't care.
Oh, okay.
Justin and I were walking around everywhere. Nobody said a word to us. Some people had them on, some people didn't. It just nothing shut down there. It's just like life is normal for the most part, with a few people that are being extra cautious. That's really all it was.
Yeah, I'm here in Texas, so we're
Similar.
Yeah, it's pretty similar. Like we do, like everyone does wear their mask, but everything's open.
Yeah.
And people are still like cautious and respectful of your space, whatever. But we're definitely not like some of the other states. And I've heard like South Dakota, they're just they never imposed any type of restrictions, and their numbers are like sky high right now. So it just depends where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody's got a different story for this year, as if they were bodybuilding and stuff. And I've heard some of the people, like you said, you were starting to get ready, and then you had to kind of put it on cruise. And I know there's some pros have been literally prepping the entire year. If they were getting ready, they got ready and they did the Arnold, and then they were going to do shows afterwards, and they just held off and kept dieting all the way through. They've been dieting the entire year. That's ridiculous. I don't know about doing a 52-week prep. I don't know if that would how that would work out.
Yeah, it seems like that look would just really start fading. I know some guys that are in the Olympia now that are they've been on prep for nearly the entire year. So
yeah, it'd be interesting. All right, so you mentioned it, and I was going to ask the question anyway. That big jump that you had right before you turned pro, from going from middleweight to a heavyweight and turning pro as a heavyweight. Obviously, you said you squeezed down. You squeezed down into the middleweight the year prior.
Yeah,
probably more like a light heavyweight, but still, that's a big jump. What was your actual weight for the when you weighed in as a heavyweight?
I weighed in at 215, and the year
So it was a
prior,
big jump. It was
yeah,
a big
no, it
jump.
was. I was, I probably could have got on stage at like 184,
Yeah.
and the year prior, and that's when I just pulled down like 8 pounds to make weight. So still, but it was still like 30-ish pounds of stage weight. And if you looked at my history, like I had competed as a light heavyweight before, and my highest weigh-in was 191. But I probably still had another like 5-6 pounds to pull off me. I just wouldn't have that experience yet to know how
To
lean
do it.
you need to get. And then just got too fat that next off season too, and I actually ended up dieting a lot of it off. So just the diet down to that middleweight was like constant pushing fat loss, because at the time I came to Matt Jansen, that was the first year I was going to work with him, and I was 12 weeks out. He's like, "Oh man, I'm not comfortable with this timeline." He's like, "We'll push though and see if we can make it." And I was just, I look at Mancy, anybody in, and I was completely shredded though.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the prep where you're going to come in like peeled, but also keep some of that fullness and everything. So the diet down to heavyweight was the complete opposite, where everything's clicking right. You can have refeeds, you can keep performance up really high. So I grew into that show. I started prep at 225, and for the first 8 weeks of prep, my body weight didn't change at all. And so it was just recomping. So yeah, from there's only like about a 10-pound change from prep starting to when I weighed in.
Yeah, your body, obviously at that point, your body was like a food processing machine. It was just going through everything and utilizing everything to its maximum.
Oh yeah, it was nutty post show after the 2015 USA's. Matt just pushed food hard. I'd never done that. Usually it was like this real slow taper up. I think I held myself back a lot. So it was like a pretty aggressive push up in food, and my body weight just climbed and climbed and climbed. And I was like, hey man, I've gained like 5 pounds this week. He's like, dude, you still have glute lines. Like just
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
going. So yeah, it was a very, very productive year. And just having that structure from a coach, like I always trained hard. That was always there. But I think having the structure of like when to push food, when not to, just made the huge difference. And then of course, I'm bodybuilding, so there was a lot of like other PEDs that I had never even touched that were kind of introduced during that time. So,
Sure.
can't be real to the fact that there was some other stuff introduced that could really push me up another level.
Sure. So I was going to ask that too. So you attribute the push in food right from the get go, coming out of 2015 and through 2016, as the biggest factor that helped you get from being a middleweight that was squeezed down to in the middle of the heavyweight class.
Yeah, I think a lot of that growth happened in that first like 12 weeks post show.
Right.
And then there was a lot of growth that still happened dieting down into the show. Like I had a normal off season, and there wasn't any like drastic changes. Body weight was just kind of slowly moving up. But I think that big push after the show, and then how we dieted down to the next show, those are probably the biggest aspects as well.
Yeah. Do you feel like? Oh, go ahead, Tommy.
Do you think that first prep where you squeezed into middleweights was? I'm guessing that you had to suffer quite a bit.
Yeah. Food was extremely low, and I was doing a ton of cardio.
So, do you think that prep served as a catalyst for obviously the next prep and then further into your career? Like, do you think suffering and not really worrying about the look had a beneficial effect on the rest of your career?
It definitely let me understand where I could take myself mentally.
Right.
I think I had that already in me just from my whole background of powerlifting, and then my getting into bodybuilding was introduced through like Dorian Yates and DC training. So I've always had these that's been my mentality. That's why I connected well with that. So I would take myself there. I just didn't know when to do it in a prep or how to structure that well. Because my first prep, I think, was my hardest prep, honestly. I remember walking to school halfway there. I was like, just stopped. I was like, I don't know if I can make it all the way. I might just fucking sit down on the ground. And because I was just willing to just brutalize myself. I did stupid stuff. I was doing like HIIT cardio in the morning on the bike, then walking like 3 miles for some steady state. So I could push myself, but it was definitely just not structured. But I realized how far I need to go to get that stage conditioning, which I never experienced. But honestly, every prep after that's it's improved. Like I've actually have suffered less with. I know most people are like, yeah, you gotta suffer, and I don't know if it's always good to just chase suffering, because that might not be the best look. It sounds cool, sounds hardcore, but a lot of times I think that you might sacrifice something, chasing the wrong variables down.
Right. Well, is it really suffering though if you've done it before and you know you can get through it? Or you're really suffering? You can push yourself mentally to that place, and it's not as bad the second or third time because you've already done it.
Yeah. So like you're saying, maybe your perception of it changes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You've been there. You can handle it.
You know what to expect.
Yeah.
It's like you get the the first time competitor, and they're like, oh my god, I pushed myself so hard and I was dead, and blah blah blah. And then the second time they're like, oh, it wasn't quite as bad, and they end up looking better because they realized what they were going into. So they kind of already knew what was going to happen, and they were able to, replicate what they did, and it really wasn't as bad as what it was the first 2 or 3 times. Not only that, but here's the thing: the more muscle you accrue, the less you got to suffer anyway. Your body's burning through calories left and right a lot faster than somebody who doesn't have as much muscle tissue.
Yeah, absolutely. Like being 180 pounds, like I'm on the stairs, doing hard cardio. Now I walk on the treadmill. Like
right
after this podcast, they built a Sonic in the beginning of my neighborhood, so I'll get 5,000 steps walking to Sonic and back. I don't eat anything at Sonic, but I just walk there and back.
Just walk to there.
Yeah, that's my cardio, and so it's definitely managing fatigue, keeps my training performance up a lot better. Mentally, it's not as draining as like staying on the stairs and building up that high level of physical and central nervous system fatigue. So,
right.
But yeah, definitely. You can't do that though if you're not like 240. Bikini girl on the treadmill. Like you're probably going to need to get on the stairs or do some hard cardio.
Right, because for you, when you're that 180 pounds, 1,500 calories a day, the last 6-7 weeks, and you're really pushing it hard, and like you said, you're on the step mill, you're going to town, you're trying to get that little last bit off. Same thing with a bikini girl, they're on the stepper, they only weigh 120 goddamn pounds, right? So they're only eating 1,000 calories a day, if they're lucky, and now 3,000 is like pushing it, for at certain points, and you're going to have to take it down a little bit lower, but you're definitely not having to do the kind of cardio that you did before, because with that amount of muscle, you're burning through more calories at rest than that bikini girl or that 180 pound you was burning through even training on a daily basis. So it is a little bit different, but then again, your perception of it isn't really suffering anymore, that I know exactly what I'm going into. I know what to expect. I know what the markers are. Right. And I know how to comprehend what I'm doing along the way. I guess it's like a twofold thing where you're not having to push as hard and suffer as much to begin with, but then your perception of the suffering isn't as great either.
Yeah, I agree. And even that whole thing about like managing fatigue through different cardio, like as I progressed in my career, like I've been able to manage my other variables outside of like cardio, weight training, what I eat. That's like, hey, you need to like manage stress and have like relaxation time, and that's going to drastically enhance your ability to push or just drop fat into period or sleep. So back then I was working like as a clinical dietitian in the hospital, then coaching people on the side, and then having to fit in bodybuilding around those things. Now it's like you work at home and everything else is built around bodybuilding. So you can definitely manage your recovery tools so much better, and everything you do just clicks accordingly because you are managing those things.
Yeah, definitely. You're not working a full-time job where you're bound to doing, and you've got the stress from the job and this and that and different things, and you can't control all those variables. And when you're able to control it, that's so much easier.
That's right. I coach people, and when I tell me like their schedules, I'm like, how in the hell are you even making progress right now? It blows my mind. People working like hard jobs and still trying to bodybuild. It's like, and what sucks too is like they're like, well, I'm following the plan, John. Why is the results coming? It's like, yeah, y'all don't get it. Like you're going to be always self-limited if you have like a suboptimal variables around what you're doing within a prep or off season. Like until you can like change that and optimize it, like it's always going to have a limited result.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
I have a guy he's an iron worker. He's trying to grow, and it's just
He's 15,000 steps a day at work. Plus he's working with heavy equipment. I mean, it's just, he gains 2 pounds, loses a pound, gains a pound, loses 3. It's just it's a cycle.
Yeah.
The adaptations you would need to do a job like that are so counter-regulatory to what you're trying to do in resistance training, right? And to grow. It's like you have these constant feedback signals that just are going to impede one another. And to step up to that next level. Gosh, yeah, you have to quit your job, man. Right?
Yeah. Well, I ran into that this year. So with the whole shutdown thing, I was off work for 9 weeks. Well, I was in the middle of dieting for a show, and everything's going real good. Everything's running its course and stuff. We got, weight came down to kind of where we wanted. Look was starting to get to where me and Justin wanted it. And all of a sudden I go back to work and I'm like 5 weeks out. And all of a sudden my weight jumped 6 pounds within the first week of being back to work. Well, didn't account for the fact that I'm walking 20,000 steps in 9 hours every day at work, and I'm doing the cardio, and we're only eating like 1,700 calories a day at that point because we're really trying to push it at that point, push condition. And my body just went backwards with water retention and everything else. So we kind of pulled back and everything. And as soon as I took the week off before work, like it was like 9 days off before the show, off of work, my body just relaxed. It flushed all that fluid out of there. All the lines and everything that were gone came back. And I think I flushed 10 pounds out in like 3 days without even doing anything different other than just being off work. So that I mean, it's a huge variable that I don't think a lot of people account for with how hard is their day-to-day life when they're trying to get ready for a contest.
I've started to use more step counting with all my clients, because that's the issue I kept running into with, you prescribe a certain amount of cardio and diet, and you're managing all this energy intake expenditure, but then it's like, gosh, the biggest component is going to be like their non-exercise activity thermogenesis, with their job. Because I've had people that have big drops, or then they hold, and you're like, what's going on? So I have people now wearing step counters, and I like, oh yeah, they had 15,000 steps yesterday and they dropped, or they held because they ended up just taking the weekend off and sitting around. And it's like some of that stuff people wouldn't even tell you. You wouldn't even know, maybe even ask. But I got like a little knockoff Fitbit now off Let's Calm. So I just use it for my step counts, and that's what I've been like prescribing throughout this prep. So as prep goes up, I just keep increasing steps, versus a lot of times people start adapting and just moving less. And you might up their cardio, but they decrease their activity in steps. And so that's those weeks, you up cardio in someone and they don't drop. You're like, what the fuck's going on? Like that doesn't like even make it's energy in, energy out, right? Like it's like, oh, they're just accounting for their cardio in another way of like just becoming more sedentary.
Well, you're talking about NEAT. Are you using like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch to track this NEAT? Is there a best method to track NEAT in your opinion?
I mean, nothing's going to be extremely accurate. I think I use this one's called Let's Calm that I have, and it's like $35 on Amazon. It's like a Fitbit. It does heart rate and shit, but it's not accurate for that. But as far as like a roundabout step counter, it's not going to be like, even sitting here, if I move my arms around, it's counting some steps. So, but it gives you a rough idea, if we're looking at thousands of steps per day. So that's what I use. And it is just steps, right? So you might be moving and not having steps going on, or maybe you're standing and you'd have some extra energy expenditure. But I think it gives you a pretty good rough estimate.
The reason why I ask is because we can have for instance, calipers are they're precise but not accurate, right? We can see that we've had a millimeter change in scapular fat without it being an accurate assessment of your body fat percentage. So what I'm hearing is we can measure the change in steps without knowing the absolute value of said steps. But what if there was a device, for all the fucking devices out there, what if there was a device that could accurately measure your heart rate, that could accurately measure your calorie expenditure, it could accurately measure your steps and your NEAT, and it could even track how much calories you were burning when you're working out? For instance, I had a girlfriend who she had a device, and she said it burnt X amount of calories when she worked out. I was like, there's no way that it could determine that. Like it can't measure how much the weight weighs that you're lifting when you're using a machine. You move that pin. How does your watch know? Your watch is keeping track of your heart rate, and it's calculating a perceived formula of exertion based off of your heart rate. But in theory, as you become adapted to workload, your heart rate will beat at a lower pace for the amount of said workload. That we all can get on a treadmill at a 10 incline and 3 miles an hour. And maybe if you haven't worked out in several months as cardio goes, you got 150 heart rate. And after 3 months of prep, you're down to 110 heart rate. Does that mean you're burning less calories? No, you're burning more you're burning the same calories because you're moving your mass over distance. I mean, in theory, if you lost fat, maybe you're burning less because you weigh less, but the relative change isn't the same. It'd be nice if we finally found one of these devices, whether it was an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or something that could accurately measure something. Not just precisely measure something, but accurately measure something. Like the DEXA scan of Fitbits.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen some clients show me their Apple Watch readings too. Like I burned 1,000 calories during my training session. Like, there's no way. Like
I know.
Like that was
Yeah.
your heart, whatever it's measuring. That's maybe a more accurate measure of just whatever it's measuring, right? So, like
Right.
you're saying, like this is a measurement of my step count according to what it does on my wrist, not of an actual true calorie expenditure. So.
Yeah, you get some of the hardest training pro bodybuilders and stuff that don't burn 1,000 fucking calories in a training session. They could be in the gym for 3 hours and not burn that much. I mean, at some point, you gotta understand there's a difference. I don't think people really understand that difference between your intensity training and how heavy you are and how relative it is, how many calories you're burning at rest, and then like 120-pound bikini girl and what she's actually burning. Like if you were burning 1,000 calories in your training session, you'd be dropping weight over a period of time like that, and then like anything else, it would just flatline. But yeah,
I had an interesting thing pop up where I got sick last October, and I had to go without 3 leg sessions in a row, and I had to go without 2 back sessions in a row, and without 1 chest session. Basically, I don't know if it was central nervous system overload or if I got some type of virus, but I had extreme gastrointestinal problems. And so I was thinking it was going to clear up, and it took 6 weeks to clear up. And during that period of time, I got gyno. And I was like, how the fuck did I get gyno? I'm not using test. I was using just DECA and a tiny bit of Tren. I did a lot of research and digging. It turns out Tren actually inhibits gyno. If you take sheep and you give them estrogen and they start developing gyno, you can give them Tren and it actually makes the gyno go away. That they found that you can't induce gyno with just progesterone alone because the progesterone inhibits the estrogen. It doesn't aggravate the estrogen. So there is no metabolic way that it could have been causing the gyno. Over the next 2 years, I found that on situations where I skipped legs multiple weeks in a row, I would get gyno. So it's just kind of like there's something to be said for the amount of workload that the muscles go through that they actually are absorbing enough of whatever's in your blood that it stops it from being chewed up and converted into esterone or whatever. And that the amount of work that you're doing once you calculate out the epoch may be dramatic, but it may have a bigger impact on our hormonal influence just doing the legs, even in people like us who are manually controlling our hormones. We've all heard that if you train legs, you get growth hormone and testosterone release. Well, yeah, if you're natural, what does that do for us? Well, I mean, apparently there's a shift towards the feminine by skipping leg day. So in other words, I proved hormonally and physiologically, if I skip leg day, I start turning into a pussy. I grew only the bitch skips leg day.
So in other words, don't skip leg day.
Exactly.
Right. Let's get into some of these some training stuff, obviously, because you said you had a DC background. Todd is into it now. He wasn't when he first started. Tommy and I, that's all pretty much all we fucking done our entire time is DC. Obviously with him, with Dusty and stuff, and me, I've known Dante and Justin Harris for fucking years. So that's how I got started with bodybuilding, was with DC training. So let's talk about some of your training history and some of your, maybe how you've adapted into where you're at now.
Yeah. So like, I mean, of course I've dabbled in a few different programs, but the mainstay initially was, once I rooted in DC training, I did that for probably a solid 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from powerlifting wasn't the best mentality at first, because you are used to moving from point A to point B and chasing a number. And so reading initially about DC training, it was like, yeah, if you're are bench pressing 405 for 10 reps, you should have a big ass chest. I'm like, well, hell yeah, that makes sense to me. But you kind of lose the aspect of like moving from point A to point B, like what happens between those points matters. And I just didn't have that at first. And, I think if you're using a certain amount of load, like even if you're not feeling it per se, like those muscles are still working,
right,
to a certain extent, right? So I made good progress with it, but I ended up getting fairly beat up doing DC training. And it's when I did start working with Matt is kind of when I started switching up the training a little bit, but it was still like always the basic core principles were there of having, a certain effort level need to be present within a work set. But we started getting away from using like rest pause and a lot of like the intensifiers, and just getting more into just doing straight sets and trying to make the most out of every straight set. And then based on recovery capacity, just adjusting those number of sets for what need to happen for a stimulus for that session. And so that's kind of where I've been at since I've come from there. And there's been lots of things. I had days where I was doing almost kind of like Scott Stevenson's fortitude training, where you'd have like a day where it would be like muscle rounds or maybe myo reps. So maybe there is some, sets where you're doing a little bit, some like reps in reserve. I know people like shit on that, but I mean, you sell someone a muscle round, they're like, oh, that sounds super cool. But it's like, well, that you're still using reps in reserve for a muscle round. But anyway, I digress on that. But so I had some of those days, but I eventually kind of just resorted back to what I'm currently doing now, where my main compound movements are still set for the day, and working up to like a heavy top set, a loading set, then like a back off set, and then if recovery permits for a compound movement, I might have a third set in place, and then moving isolation movements last in the session, which usually I'm doing like a higher repetition range in those. I'm not so focused on necessarily being very intentional in progressing load. It's more of trying to make the most out of like the metabolic stimulus and pump, and using more variation within those. And then as far as like programming out throughout my sessions, it just depends on like what the weakness is that I'm trying to address, and making sure like across those exercises for that session, I can maximize performance. So like for my push days, I'll have my lateral raise is always first, because it doesn't seem to impede any type of my compound movements.
Right.
You can never have big enough side delts in my mind, so it makes sense just to add them in first. Now doing a pec fly, that might not make sense first, because that's probably going to impede like my pressing for the day. Not that there's no application there, but that's just kind of like the general structure of how I lay out my training plan. So I kind of have like that set volume and structure, and then across like a mesocycle for weeks, I'll keep that fairly stagnant. Effort level's pretty stagnant, so I can really just assess how everything's going. There's lots of programs where set volume is manipulated and effort's manipulated, and there's so many moving parts. I think it makes it hard to assess week to week what's really occurring within that, especially within an environment where recovery is also changing within that. You really just won't. You'll be chasing your tail sometimes, and so I think keeping a lot of variables set, progressing those things, and then once you have a real good grasp on where you're at, maybe then you make a decision, looking back over data for a few weeks, of when you should be adding in maybe a set of volume. And for someone that lifts, probably like a lot of us, that is a higher effort level set, that can be a pretty big hammer to throw down. Like another set of like a squat or something. That's the difference between recovering and like taking yourself out for a week, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's the general. So volume is kind of auto-regulated based on where my recovery is, and I kind of have this base volume that I work within, and after like so my deload will come, and that kind of comes down to meet me. I don't chase it, so I know there's some thought on doing some intentional overreaching within a training cycle, and maybe a super compensation of hypertrophy takes place. And I just don't quite buy into that. I think you're chasing the wrong variables, and the risk is too high.
Yeah.
So so usually deload, maybe movements might be changed out that have been kind of stalled, and rinse and repeat and keep on progressing.
Yeah, that's honestly, I mean, you said with Matt Jansen and stuff, and pretty much even that's like the new DC now. I think what it's evolved into. Tommy, I see the same thing with Dusty. It's more straight set, back off set than as much rest pause anymore now. With him, is the same thing, correct?
I mean, we did regular DC for a few weeks. I think so. Everything kind of trends. So top set, back off set kind of became a thing across Instagram, and I'm not knocking it because it is what I do as well. But I watch everything start to trend. And it's like everyone starts doing it, like banded hack squats. Now everyone's doing them.
I swear. They've been doing them for years, but yeah, everybody's doing them now.
I think, John, we started doing cupped laterals because you put them in a program for Dusty, and now we love them. But now everyone on Instagram's doing it. So I see the trends, but yeah, I think DC isn't dead by any means, but I think it's more evolved into you're going to take the DC like mindset and the principles and establish it to this new age training, which is great because the DC mindset, I believe, is what works. That's what you need to train like in the off season to put on the size to get into the upper echelons of, what it takes to win amateur shows, pro shows, be at John's level, etc. So my thought on the top set, back off set is, I think you touched on it. That top set, you might not have as much connection, but I think over the weeks of like establishing a better connection with that top set, and then the back down set gets better because your nervous system's primed for it, so you can have a better connection there as well. So I think the top set, it's okay not to have as great a connection because I'm a big believer in slag iron. Like to have that dense look on stage, you need to put your body through those heavy sets over and over and over, and just try to increase the connection that you have with them over time. That's kind of how I look at it, where we're at now with like DC and top set, back off set. And I think we're all still trying to do the same thing, train with heavy slag iron. I think now we're just focusing more on the mind muscle connection and then those variables as well, versus like the 90s and the original DC approach was like, all right, we're going to put as much weight on the bar and just make it happen.
Chasing the logbook.
So can I paraphrase this and dumb it down a little bit? Make sure I and the viewers who may understand what we're talking about. Okay, so we use a lot of specific terms like RPE 8. We talked about top set. We talked back off set. We talked DC. So let me go through from the top, make sure that I understand the nomenclature and we're all on the same page. Because I once found that Fuad used a phrase and everyone thought they were on the same page and no one in the room was on the same page. So to me, the most intense thing is the DC set, which is considered a rest pause set without a drop set. You're not decreasing the weight. So let's say we're talking bent row and you're doing 405 and you get 8 reps. You set it down for 15 deep breaths. Dusty cleared that up for us in July of 2017 because I thought it was 15 quick breaths. It's 15 deep breaths, about 45 seconds. And then you do about 4 more reps. Then you do another 45 seconds of deep breathing. Then you do 2 more reps. So you're getting 14 reps with a weight you could only normally do 8 times, which is based on Dorian's system. Now, then there is an RPE 10 set or a top set, which is you don't take it beyond failure. You just do that set like a gun to your head, and you get your 8 reps of 405, and you can't get 9 perfect reps So you don't go for a 9th shit rep. That would be RPE 11. So the Jordan Peters approach of doing perfect reps but no shit reps is how you don't get beat up. The back off set is, okay, if my work set range for my top set was a 6 to 8, that means my back off set is another RPE 10 set, but in an 8 to 12 range. So we drop the weight, maybe 10 to 20%, and we repeat our final set with the same amount of intensity. It's just because it's lighter, we get the mind muscle connection that we didn't get from the 6 to 8 rep set or the 5 to 7 rep set. Does everyone agree on these terms so far?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the rep range, I don't think is necessarily, I don't think that's necessarily set in stone because I mean, there's certain movements are going to predicate more a higher or lower rep range.
And leg extensions are going to be higher rep range than deadlifts, which is usually going to be the lowest.
Well, and not only that, I'm not at my age at 40, almost 42 years old. I'm not pushing 6 fucking reps on a shoulder press anymore, unless I don't want to have shoulders in 3 weeks that actually function and work.
Right.
So if I don't want to be able to lift my arms anymore, then I'll do that.
I was just
I'm going to take that a bit higher. But yeah.
I was giving the numbers out as a relative thing. So set A is X amount of reps, and then set B is also RPE 10 with 2X or 1.5X amount of reps.
It's not even necessarily RPE anything there. You do the first one. If you're doing a rest pause, it's you find a rep range that's safe for you, and you keep it within that rep range for all 3 loops or just 2 loops if you're doing 2. Sometimes you do a single rest pause. Sometimes I do a double rest pause. I don't do them on compound moves anymore. Okay. I do it on my isolation moves because it's a lot fucking safer. I'm not going to hurt myself doing that. My compound moves now are all straight set back off set.
Okay. Well, I do want to
possibly 2 straight sets in a back off set if I get a high enough rep range as far as to failure on the first one. So if I'm doing, let's say I am doing shoulder press, and if I get like 12 or 13 reps on that first one, I'm stronger than what I thought. I'm going to do that same weight again to where I can't get 10. So if I get 10 again, or I get like 9, then I might back off and take like 25% of the load off and then go for broke and see how many reps. And there's no range on that one. It's just training perfect reps to failure. When I can't get another perfect rep to failure, then I'm going to rack it at that point. Unless I have somebody spotting me, then we might get some forced reps in there. Or if it's a machine movement that I'm doing it on, so like a shoulder press machine where I'm not going to hurt myself, like a hammer strength one, I might do partials in the bottom range or something until I can't budge the bar anymore. As long as I'm not using other muscles to move the weight and it's now becoming counterproductive, I don't necessarily not worried about necessarily the rep range as much as I'm doing is how are we failing? You know, so are the reps perfect?
So the point I was trying to make is when John had said that he doesn't do chest crossovers, for instance, before presses, it's going to hurt his pressing strength. I have run into this situation, and this is something I understood that Dorian did and Luke mentioned, that doing the pre-exhaust doesn't end up hurting your top end lift that much, if at all. I can give you an example of this, that I was doing bent rows, worked my way up to 425 for 8 shit reps. They're ugly reps. But I was able to move 425, so now my back off is 365, and they're strict, and I feel them in my lats. Mm-hmm. But when I moved up from there to 435, I only got 4 reps. So I was like, all right, I'm going to start pre-exhausting. So I started doing rope, straight arm pull downs, started doing underhand pull-ups, and I worked those up, and I made progressive resistance and broke PRs every week. I was always pulling 435 for 4 or 5 reps, and they felt like shit. I felt weak as a kitten. My body felt like I was hitting a train by one side but not the other. So yesterday I went in and did back, and I was like, I feel great today. I'm not going to do the bent rows third. I'm going to do the bent rows first. I had 434, 5 shit reps, the same as the week before, but they felt fantastic. I felt so strong, even though the bar didn't move any more times or in any more coordinated of a fashion. But my straight arm pull down sucked ass, and my pull-ups sucked ass. So I found that all I did was fuck myself out of having really good pre-exhaust, but the top end wasn't any better, but it felt great. So I don't know on my data analysis, I'm not stronger when I do my heavy compounds first. I'm usually weaker. For instance, the last time I tried to do squats first, I got 405 for 2, and I felt like my quads were going to snap off the bone. Whereas I did them after I broke a leg press PR, and I got 455 for 9, which is I tied my all-time PR, and I think that was 2 hours and 45 minutes into the workout. So I found that doing the top set, back off set with the compounds after the isolation pre-exhaust doesn't really hurt my top end sets after a couple weeks. And then when I go back to doing a traditional way with the compounds first, I'm not stronger. I might actually be more brittle or more weaker.
Yeah.
And I wish there was a way that I could standardize this or explain it, but I don't have an answer for it.
We actually have some pretty good data in the literature comparing these things. And what they show is that it does depend on the lift. So if you have a compound lift that loads the intended muscle well in the lengthened position, because loading a muscle more so in the lengthened position seems to cause more hypertrophy stimulus, because you have more force production in the lengthened state versus like a movement that would have more contractility, like in the shortened state, like a leg extension, right? So doing like a leg extension prior to a squat would have less hypertrophy stimulus versus the opposite. Now, doing like a tricep press down before doing like a bench press, because the bench press loads the pecs in the lengthened state very, very well, but it's not that great of a stimulus for the triceps. What actually has been shown to have better growth doing like a tricep push down before doing a bench press, but doing it like a leg extension prior to doing like a squat versus the opposite has shown less hypertrophy stimulus. Now, this is pretty nuanced. It's in research, so big picture takeaway, how do we really get hypertrophy? And it's doing a certain effort level over a certain number of sets. And if you equate that volume, no matter how you do it, whether we're top sets, back off sets, we do all the same sets. If we're within like probably 6 up to the 30 rep range and the sets are hard, it might not make a huge difference. And we're getting pretty nuanced into where we're loading the stretch or the shorten phase. And this is getting really the sexy talk nowadays of program design. Like for you, right? So if you do your lat pull down, your pullovers first, then your pull downs, or your pull downs versus your pullovers in that order, if they're all hard sets within the hypertrophy rep range, like if it's all said and done, like it might not make a huge impact. Now, like you said,
Right.
if you have a great connection versus one order, well, that's probably the best way to do it, because that is bodybuilding, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think, yeah, looking at the big picture probably matters. We're doing hard sets and within a good rep range, that probably makes the most sense, and within safety. So you're right, like doing a squats first, it feels like your kneecaps might pop off. Well, that's probably limiting, right? And what you're going to be able to do for force production from a safety standpoint. And just say like you feel like shit lifting, well, hell yeah, do your leg press first and then go squat.
Yeah.
And then progress up.
And I think that's almost, I don't know if that's an over 40 thing, but I think that's what Keith was saying too, is going to lift defensively, in the sense that the point is to traumatize the muscles, not the tendons and the joints. And that we're picking the order of the exercises, the exercise selection, and the rep ranges based on how to keep as much positive pain and how to keep as little negative pain.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go.
No, I completely agree. And I think the top set, back off set is like a way to train, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's a lot of times that I go in, like I'll have a lot of shoulder issues, and for my like shoulder press movement, I'll do, it won't make sense terminology wise, I'll do my back off set first. All I'm doing is a high rep set first. Then it's like, okay, that feels buttery now I'll increase load and do a lower rep set. Is that less effective? They're both hard sets in the hypertrophy rep range, but I also feel like I'm much safer in doing so. Is doing your 8 rep first, then your 15, or your 15, then your 8 in that order doesn't really matter big picture. I think the number one programming strategy is adherence and sustainability. So if we have an exercise order that gives us sustainability and safety in our training, that's probably the best way to be training.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually pre-exhaust everything now. That's all it is. It's eliminating injury. And what I realize is that I'm not any weaker if I pre-exhaust. So like you said, doing the side laterals, it doesn't bother you. It doesn't hinder you at all with your strength or your pressing strength. Same thing. So I'll do side laterals, rear laterals, and then I'll go do my shoulder press. And on the shoulder press, like Sunday I did the hammer strength one, and I still had 4 plates per side and a quarter on each one. And I'm still getting 10 reps. And that's after doing side laterals with dumbbells where my top set was a single rest pause and then a back off set. And then the same thing with rear pec deck, right? With the rear lateral on a pec deck, same thing with that. And then go over and do the shoulder press. Now I'm not blowing myself out either on all my warm-ups. My warm-ups are 10 reps, 5 reps, 3 reps, 1 rep just shy of what I'm going to do. Okay, that feels good, ready to go. Now let's hit it. So I think a lot of that too with pre-exhausting is, how are you pre-exhausting or are you priming? What are you doing? Because if I'm literally pre-exhausting and I'm going for broke and I'm doing like 6, 7, 8 sets of side laterals, yeah, I'm not going to be as strong when I go to press, especially if I'm doing, 8, 9, 10 rep warm-up sets all the way up. There's no way. Then it's like 2 plays per side and we're struggling through it, right? Because we're dead, and the reps look shitty and it's all tricep pushing and everything else, right? But if I'm only doing 5, 6 rep sets on the way up with the isolations just to get that, and then I do that 1 or 2 heavy, connected set to get the most out of it, and then go do the same thing for the next move, I'm not going to get any weaker. If anything, I might, like Todd said, I might be stronger because everything's primed and ready to go. My old joints are loosened up. The tendons are firing and functioning the way they're supposed to. They're not going to rip. I actually, and Todd was there, and I still blame Todd for this. I tore my pec in
You
January.
blame me.
I still blame you for this one. I tore my pec in January. We were just getting ready to start prep, and was just getting ready to start. And I've been pre-exhausting for years. So I was like, yeah, we're going to do like a pec deck fly before we do chest. I got to, I get 3 sets at least. But when I say 3 sets, that was 3 working sets. That three working sets, 2 failure or just shy of failure, right? To get everything firing properly. Then we'll go do incline press and we'll go from there. Todd's 3 sets he just set 3 sets. It was 3 warm-up bullshit sets. I'm like, it's 3 sets, let's go. And he took off towards the incline. And I'm like, I'm not even fucking warmed up yet. It takes me a long time to get loosened up. I've had shoulder injuries and everything else over the years and stuff. I wrestled for 15 years. So my shoulders are just destroyed anyway, from constant getting cranked on and stuff. So we go over there, warm up goes okay. And I got 365. We're doing incline of 365. And on like the 9th rep, I feel my full front delt move.
Oh,
torn. All right. So I rack it. I'm like, okay, that didn't feel right, Todd. He's like, oh, that doesn't look like it's torn. Like, wait a few minutes. It's not bruising. So I'm like, maybe it's okay. So we did the back off set with 315.
oh no.
I did like 20 fucking reps. It didn't hurt at all. But when we went over to flat dumbbells, he wanted to do flat dumbbells. I laid back with 120s and I didn't even get them up and it went pop and out it came. And I'm like, fuck, I'm done. I'm done for the day. I'm done right there. And it just finished off the damage that was already there. But I've never hurt myself pre-exhausting fully on anything. And I can go for broke on it. And for me, I just started pre-exhausting probably like in the last 3-4 years, fully everything. But I've always done it for legs. Since I started bodybuilding, I've always done it for legs. I've always done hamstrings first, full hamstring, and then I go to quads, and I will do leg extensions first or Bulgarians, and then go squat or do hack squats. And my knees feel the best out of anything in my body. That's what feels the best. And I did it just because I didn't have to put retarded loads on a squat because I always trained by myself. So for me, loading up 6 plates on a squat and going for broke when there's nobody around is probably not a good idea. I'm going to end up underneath that thing at some point and it's going to be bad. So I always tried to limit what my strength was going to be and it didn't work. I still was doing as much, but I was warmed up enough and felt like I had control of the weight and just didn't realize that I was actually weaker and not weaker when I was doing it. So the pre-exhaust for I think it's an independent thing. I think some people, like when you're younger, like you can go and you can warm up and you can do all the heavy compound movements and you're probably going to be okay. But as the older you get, I think it's not as much of a hindrance, but plus that muscle tissue doesn't take as much to keep there, I can do those isolation moves.
As you progress too, I think it becomes different. You're not trying to shotgun blast a stimulus with a squat, and you do need to get more precise because you're just so much more accurate, and you can generate a lot of fatigue off a big compound movement first. And you're probably not looking for this big overall mass growth. I mean, maybe you are, hell, but at that level, it's probably not. It's probably is getting a little bit more direct, so a little bit more direct approach in your movement selection. And your order would make sense at that point. But for a beginner, maybe that is different,
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's talk about you for personal. I mean, do you get more out of a squat or do you get more out of a hack squat?
A hack squat. Yeah.
Most people say the same thing, right? Would you get more out of the squat if you were pre-fatigued with, like, say, leg extensions or Bulgarians and everything was loosened up and you could actually feel the quads fire?
I probably would. And actually, in my own programming, I don't do leg extension first, but I do a band pulling down on the leg press, and it makes the load really light on the bottom and overloads the top a lot. And so it's the idea of like, hey, you're contracting the muscle hard at lockout, and it's a safer spot versus trying to contract it when it's fully stretched. And I'll do like a 20 rep set, which is pretty low risk. You're not doing a set of 5. Then I'll go into my squat pattern from there.
Yeah.
I do the same thing on like hamstrings. So I do a leg curl first before going into any type of RDL.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the muscle's primed, it's warmed up. Now we can put it under stretch load. Yeah. The hamstrings first too, before doing quads and stuff. I found that when I go to squat, if I just warm up on the leg extension, right, my legs feel phenomenal squatting at the bottom because my hamstrings are pumped up. So it's literally like trying to squat off pillows, right? Because like you go to the bottom and you got that pump in your hamstring and it's like, okay, this feels really, really good coming out of the hole. But at the same time, a lot of people, when they squat, they don't actually, their quads don't fatigue before their lower back does. And how many times do you feel your hips and your lower back give out before your quads actually give out on a squat? So by pre-exhausting, it makes my quads actually give out when they're supposed to, when my lower back does or just before my lower back does. So I feel like you say we're doing a hack squat, you're taking a lot of the lower back out of it because you're pinned up against the machine. Or if you do like a leg press first, like you said, you're more isolation on the quads and taking some of your hips and your lower back out of the movement and stuff. Now we're getting a little more isolation on the quads where that's a better movement. And to do that first, now your squatting is going to be that much better. You're actually getting more out of that squat than you were if you were to just necessarily start for it. When I pre-exhaust, that's pretty much all I'm doing. I'm just making it so that my compound move, I'm getting the absolute most out of it because everything's firing.
I mean, that's bodybuilding because otherwise the powerlifting, right? If we're picking movements just to train a movement and not the muscle, well, then it's probably not a great movement. So I don't even squat because why if I have to. Now, this is not saying your way, but for me, my thought process was like, well, if I'm having to do all these things before I squat to make the squat a good movement, is the squat even a good movement for me?
Right. When
I have like a hack squat or a pendulum squat that already does it, and I'm not trying to like build this movement into something that I want it to be when I have a machine that's already made for me that way,
Yeah.
So sometimes you just got to rule out the exercise. I think it's okay. Like we always hear like, oh man, you got to squat for the big quads. It's like, you don't have to do any exercise in bodybuilding. Hypertrophy is a pretty forgiving adaptation. There's lots of tools that we can use to accomplish that. Lots of different exercises.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to force this exercise to train a muscle group and you just can't do it, well, hell, just go to a different exercise.
Yeah. My quads actually got bigger when I stopped squatting.
What I found was weird is that everybody does their leg press so deep, and I just feel my abs or my groin or my lower back when I go deep. In order for me to keep it on the quads, as soon as it starts to hit my glutes, If I change direction, I'm usually not even at 90, but my feet are low on the pad. If I move my feet up the pad, I can get a little deeper, but then it's more hamstrings, less quads.
Mm-hmm.
If I go to the hack squat, I'm not feeling the lateral quad like everyone does. I'm feeling the tendon as it attaches to the patella. And if I go to free weight squats, it's light as fuck, but it's all glutes and hamstrings. I found that the Smith squat, if I put my feet just right, I'm able to hit my lateral quads, which is supposedly what everyone else gets when they do the hack squat. But I only get that if I've already done leg extension, leg press, and then I do hamstrings again, and then I come back and Smith squat. Then I can get my butt really deep and still feel my lateral quads, not feel my knees, not feel my lower back. So obviously all anatomy is different because people can have different hip widths and different quad lengths. And then there's also different foot placements for everything except for really free weight squats. Very different foot placements for free weight squats. I think it's interesting, though, that changing the order of the same exercises can also change what they're targeting. I mean, nothing really hits me as good as a pendulum squat. Just who's got a fucking pendulum squat?
Yeah, it's not that's something that every gym has. I'm trying. Yeah, I'm trying to get one, man. I found one online for like, it was the old Paramount, the original one, the Paramount one, $900. And I was like, I told the gym, I was like, you got to go get this thing. He clicked on the link, it was gone already. It's like, no, you waited too long. You got to go get that thing.
The one I used only held 5 plates.
Yeah, but you don't need very many plates on a pendulum squat.
Well, I was getting 8 reps with 5 plates after squatting, after leg pressing. I'd be like 4 hours in the workout and then put it at the very end, and I'd still be 5 plates.
How far up the platform of your feet? Because I put mine all the way to the bottom to where my heels
if I do that,
come off.
It would be all knees if I did at the bottom.
Oh, yes, that's how I do it, though.
So I have to be my knees and my lower back. Everything's about how can I feel it in my quads, not my knees. Not my lower back.
I literally, on any quad movement, if it's a fixed one, like a leg press, hack squat, even the pendulum squat, I'm trying to get my feet as far down on that platform as I can to where my heels, just before they start to raise up. And then if I really want to go lower, I'll just put a 45-pound plate underneath on the platform so my feet, they don't raise up, and I'll just go off of an angle. I just like to torture my quads when I do it. I want to get as much stretch and as much motion as I can out of that, and put as much strain on the quad as possible. So there's no way I can do 5 plates on a pendulum squat like that. I'd be lucky to get like 1 1/4 if my feet are all the way to the bottom. There's no way. No.
That brings up
I'd get buried.
So, John, how much foam rolling, mobility, stretching, and massage therapy do you do as a top 4 Olympian?
That's probably my most neglectful area, but it's been probably for a lot of guys, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was hoping you wouldn't say.
But honestly, the past 2 years, I've kind of had to assess, like, hey, where are you really lagging, and where can I make up more ground? And that was absolutely the one area. So I have a great guy here. There's a physical therapist, and he's also all types of certifications. But basically, he has done some awesome assessments on me and found a lot of movement dysfunctions that I had. So I used to think it was mobility that was causing my issue, and it wasn't, because he could take me passively through these range of motion. I just didn't have the function to do it on my own. So it's like you've had these compensation patterns happening for years. And this has been a lot of my shoulders. So just weak rotator cuff muscles that just couldn't operate the shoulder, and I'm making compensations with other muscles to do the job. So I started having pec minor issues, coracobrachialis issues, like muscles that are trying to stabilize my shoulder that shouldn't be. So now I have like a whole prehab routine that I go through for both my push and pull days and my leg session. So there's no pre-foam rolling that I do, but there's a lot of stabilization movements that I do, and also activation work that I do for these weaknesses that I have. So usually before each session, there's about like 5 like main go-to movements that I do that address what I need from a movement standpoint. If I do any foam rolling before, it's usually in areas that's very specific and maybe has some tightness, but usually it's a red flag for me if like, why do I have a muscle that's tight? And it's probably some joint above or below it that's telling that muscle to stop fucking moving, John. We're about to tear off. So should I just roll it out, then go train, or should I, maybe think about this a little bit more? So,
Right.
but yeah, I still will have some foam roll usually in the evening if I'm doing it from just increasing blood flow to that area and aiding recovery. So,
Yeah.
I'm not a yoga specialist or something, but I definitely do a lot more. And I've been doing weekly chiropractic work, which I've never done that before. And actually, that was a huge impact because I did some stuff back when I powerlifted, and it was just like cookie cutter. Come in, we crack you the same way every time. And I have a guy now that truly assesses and can feel with his hands, like and does very direct adjustments, and it has been actually very dramatic change. So. That's what I've been implementing. I did something cool yesterday. Have y'all seen this shockwave treatment? I posted on my story, but they use this sound wave around whatever joint you have. It used to be developed for horses, and it can use these waves to cause like not distort the muscle, but bring it back into like normal functional movement. So, and it's cool because you move it around and you'll have these pain spots you'll find, and it's where tissue's been like dehydrated or malformed, and this stuff is supposed to help with like making it back into formation. But I did one treatment, and today for push, it was a phenomenal difference in I've had some pain sleeping at night, and then also my pressing, I have some nags in my rotator cuff, and I had the best shoulder stability that I've ever had using this treatment. It was pretty incredible. They actually banned it back when it first came out for horses because it would enhance the horse's running capability, and it had like an analgesic effect. So that basically would have like fatal injuries racing the horses because they could just like keep going, and they had a higher level of force production that they weren't capable of before.
Right.
I didn't have a fatal injury today, but.
Did you notice any difference with muscle contraction and stuff? Was it increased just after doing it once, or?
Well, he treated my shoulder, so I had a better stability because I feel like I could, and then in that sense, I was able to get I got an awesome like pec pump that it's been hard to get. That's my like weak body part, hard to have a connection, and just increasing the stability. I felt like I could have better pec contraction doing it. So
yeah,
it definitely made a difference.
That's definitely worth checking out.
Have you had a dry needling done by your PT?
I've never had that.
See, I get that usually every 2 weeks on whatever's. I found the biggest thing with dry needling is it's like you were saying, like a lot of us have just inhibitions that we don't realize we have. Like you can tell someone to squat to the ground and stand back up. How they get there, it might look like a squiggly line.
Yeah.
One knee caves in, one knee goes out. Like your body will force itself down because you're telling it to go down, and it will force itself back up if you tell it to stand up. But how you're doing that might not be optimal. So I found with dry needling, the biggest thing with my leg development has been opening up the muscles that I just never learned how to connect with or were inhibited from other things. A lot of it's joint issues, like you said. So between dry needling and then doing my own, every day I do cars for all my joints, just controlled articulated rotations, because the more joint capacity you have, the more muscle tissue you can put on, right?
Yeah.
So it's just these little things that I really think they make a huge difference, especially the more advanced you get, because there's only going to be so much weight you can really keep adding before you might get a 5 and a 10 here and there as adding loads, but at some point you're pretty much right where you're going to be strength-wise, and then you got to go into picking new variables to maximize to get the most out of each movement. I mean, I don't think I'm ever going to put 495 pounds on a bar and military press it. That's never going to happen. So 315 to 365 is going to be my sweet spots. and I just got to find a way to maximize that and do all the things I can do while staying safe. But yeah, dry needling, I would check that out. It's a pretty cool. In a lot of states, it's a gray area for PTs. Arizona, it's wide open. They're allowed to do it without any issues. In Michigan, it was kind of like they didn't really want you doing it, the PT board there, but some PTs were rogue and would do it anyway. So I found a few there, but in Arizona, it's a big thing. And I mean, Dusty and I see the same guy every week. And so I'll often text him after a movement in a session because I know something's off and I need him to fix it. I mean, it's to that point where like you get so in tune with your body. And like the biggest thing on a leg press, I feel, is like I find no one goes deep enough with leg press, but they'll load it up with 20 plates aside. Their knees don't go over their toes. They get no quad activation. I find a lot of it because they have inhibition that they've never even tapped into.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a great point, Tommy, because I spoke earlier about, if the load's heavy, even if you don't feel it and you go through that range, you're going to be using these muscles that in general, right? But that might not be the case if you have some type of dysfunction to where you just can't neurally recruit it as much as you want to, or you poke and prod or whatever you want to do. There's something neurally going on that might need some type of work done by one of these specialists. Because I have a lot of clients that are like, man, they have asymmetries occurring, right? And like you could do single leg stuff and all day pre-fatigue and it just doesn't work. And it's like something's going on in their movement dysfunction, and you have to address these things with some of these techniques to not, even though you're trying as hard not to make it point A to point B, you just have to see how you can get that better connection. So that's cool. I'd like to try out like the dry needling if that made a big difference.
What was this cars you talked about, Tommy?
Well, it's like controlled articulated rotations. I mean, you can find them on YouTube, but okay. I learned about them through like Seth Shaw and John Quinn, and then I started exploring them more, or John Quint. But essentially, it's basically like if I was going to do one for my arms, it's full controlled rotation with the shoulder and spinning that arm all the way at the top. A lot of us get stuck here, especially bodybuilders, because we've got all the chest mass and we neglect the little muscles behind in the back of the shoulder. So it's just about keeping the joints actively open. The more joint space you have, the more tissue you can accrue. I mean, essentially. So I think a lot of us just neglect. I was big about neglecting it most for the early part of my career. And then it's like, I don't know that I've actually gotten a ton stronger. My development is I just gave myself more capacity to build tissue on. And then the loads I was doing became more efficient because of that.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I've assessed my own data. But a lot of people have leg imbalances. So one leg's longer than the other. I have that. So like a 12.5 millimeter difference left to right. I mean, that's pretty significant, especially when you talk about vertical squat or vertical movements. So for me, like a leg curl, if it's a unilateral, if I'm doing a standing leg curl with the left leg, the piriformis will kick in. So there's no hamstring engagement. I'm still curling, but there's no hamstring engagement on the left side. If I'm doing it like a lying leg curl with both legs, the right side's taking the majority of the load because the left leg, the piriformis kicks in. So I'll get that needled once every 2 weeks, and then it relaxes it. He does an assessment on me every time. Every time he needles me, the pre-assessment shows that it's locked, and then he'll needle me, and then it's right back to where it should be. But it's just something. He said it's something like, I sleep on my left side like this a lot. So any issues I have, like we develop them just from little things we don't know. Like if you drive, like I drive with my left hand on the wheel like this shoulder's always higher in presses than the right. So it's little things over time that just add up.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, my massage therapist, she's got this technique thing where she like assesses the muscles and there's special pressure points she can touch. And she works these pressure points, and then it'll instantly make that problem corrected. So like if I go and I don't see her for 2 or 3 weeks, everything's not firing right and I'm weak. But if I go see her, then no matter what body part I hit after her, I'm going to break a PR for sure. But you don't want to be paying $100 a workout either on top of all the supplements you're taking. So it's nice to be able to activate that stuff yourself. Like obviously you can't dry needle yourself, But if you can locate those pressure points, maybe simply massaging place that would normally be needled might be good enough to activate.
Yeah. I have never gotten into any kind of like major PT work other than just regular massage, deep tissue work. That's about the extent. I'll foam roll. I usually foam roll whatever I train that day after I get done. So a couple hours later, when the DOM starts to set in and stuff, and you've got that fatigue, I'll go through and roll it just to get some extra blood flow into that area so that it's got the recovery capability. That's literally been the extent. The only thing I do is I've never called it cars, Tommy, but I've done for my shoulders. I've done similar things over the years for the same reason, to try to keep whatever mobility I can in there, because I mean, with all the issues that I've had and stuff with shoulders over the years and stuff, that's literally that's my biggest problem is with upper body training is shoulder pain, especially with training shoulders and chest. So I've always done that to keep that mobility. Plus, when I hit a rear double bicep in the off season, I can't hit it. I can't hit it at all because I can't get my damn shoulders back far enough to even make it. It looks like crap. It looks like I'm hunched over. Arms are in front of me. It's like you can't even squeeze your shoulder blades together because it's so uncomfortable. So I started doing that just so I can actually, and forcing myself to do that rear double so that I can continue to keep that movement in, so that when I do diet down, it's there and it's easy and it's natural and there's no issues. So literally having to teach myself how to redo it every prep. I just continue to do those shoulder movements now so that it's easy to do, which I'm sure helps with everything else.
It's funny about that, Tommy. I probably read, it was probably like when I first got into DC training, one of Dante's posts, and he's like, do this if your shoulders have issues. And he's like, take a broomstick and go overhead and back and do that 40 reps. Do it every night. And, you don't stick with that, right?
Right.
But it's like the same concept. Like Dante said this shit like 10 years ago. It's like, damn it, we should have just kept doing that.
Right.
Have that mobility and strengthening and getting into those extreme ranges that we never do. But same concept, right?
Yeah. Dante was onto a lot of things 20 years ago that they're just coming into with physical therapy stuff now, that it was just movement patterns that he would use then, that it's like, if I would have just kept doing this over the years, like you said, I probably wouldn't have any issues now.
He's wrapped his elbows his whole life, but he wraps everything north of the elbow.
Up here. Yep.
He does it rather loose. It's not like tight. And I mean, he's in his 50s and he's never, ever had tendonitis once in his life. And he swears by it. So.
Yeah, I have the mini sleeves, Iron Rebel mini sleeves, and I'll pull them up over the top so they're on my tricep. They're just north of my elbow and on all my heavy pressing movements, and I don't have any issues with my elbows at all. I had issues when I wasn't using them. I had issues when I was using a tight sleeve, or when I would use like knee wraps on there and even put them loose and stuff. As soon as I started putting them above the elbow, because he told me the same thing. He's like, just put it north of your elbow. He says, I've been doing it for years. I don't have any problems. So I started putting it above the elbow. All elbow pain went away, like within 2 weeks. So I won't ever do anything ever again without some sort of sleeve or wrap above right on the tricep when I do presses.
Cool.
Same thing with knees too. He's like, leave the knee alone. Put the wrap where you need it for the stability for the joint. So keep the majority of the tension below the kneecap, right? So that the joint is actually stabilized from underneath. It's the same concept. If you see everybody's wraps their knees really, really tight, well, all you're doing is you're compressing everything and you're making it grind more. Yeah, you might be able to get a few more reps with a higher weight because you've got a little spring there and everything's got a little more stability to it. But if you really want to truly help the joint and save it, put the majority of the pressure underneath the joint so that where it's pushing against. So it's the same concept as putting it here, putting it underneath, putting the majority of the tightness underneath the kneecap.
Well, that makes sense. I never got using like knee wraps or for like bodybuilding. It's like, if I'm trying to save my knees, why would I want to have to use more load? Like that defeats the point of what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah. Well, I think Dorian said the same thing about knee wraps. He's like, he never used knee wraps. He just used a looser fitting knee sleeve that would just keep the joint warm, and it would just provide enough so it didn't shift too much, rather than wrapping it up super tight and, you know, doing the figure 8 on it. So you can, you know, if you're really only supposed to do like 405, you're doing 495 now, you know, because you've got extra spring at the bottom. You're getting a little extra help.
John, I got a question about your prep. I don't know where your weight's at currently, but I remember I saw a post maybe recently where I looked at it and I was like, how the hell is this guy going to make 212? You're like 236 and you're in damn good shape. Are you guys having to push hard to make, because you do have a weight limit to make?
Yeah, so I've right around 224 right now, and I'm pretty conditioned. Usually around 216, 217 is where I'm just pretty shredded out, and then I have to deplete down a little bit and get down to that 212 mark. Once I'm down there, I haven't had to do anything extreme with cutting water or anything. I try not to, because that's usually how I've always ruined my look, with using diuretics to make weight. I never have looked good after using them. And so all these past shows, Chicago, we used them, and I looked super flat on stage. Tampa, I drank 3 gallons of water every single day. I never changed it, didn't cut water. I had a gallon and a half before I went on stage, and I was super hard.
But you
Olympia,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you drank a gallon and a half less Saturday than you did Friday, though, right?
So it was a gallon and a half. No, 3 gallons. So for a Saturday show, it was 3 gallons on Friday. Before prejudging, it was almost a gallon and a half that I got in. So I still had my 3 gallons for the day.
By the end of the day, yeah. But I mean, you weren't like, you were still at half fluid load when you stepped on stage for prejudging.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So you didn't use a diuretic, you cut 12 pounds of water.
Right. No diuretic.
Well, the water at that point, the water is your diuretic. You're just going to be pissing all day long.
Yeah, it's
every
nonstop.
10 minutes.
For Olympia, it was a little different because the feedback was for finals. I was a little bit too watery. So prejudging Olympia, there was no diuretics, but then we used them going into finals to hold that dryness that I had.
Mm-hmm.
Did you like that look? Did you like the final night show after the diuretic?
Yeah, actually, it was good, and so I almost think if there's a fine line to find with using some diuretic and an amount of water in the morning, and I think I can get a little bit that tighter look. It's starting where you're like you look for that 1% and you're like, oh shit, you might just go 10% backwards, right?
Right.
So I don't whatever I did, it would be very minor.
What did you do that you liked, though? Was it like a half a diazide, a full hydrochlorothiazide? What'd you use?
So it was I'm fairly responsive to it, so I'll use a quarter of a diazide. So it was at 6.25 a hydrochlorothiazide, and then whatever that comes out, 15 milligrams of triamtermene or whatever else is in there with it. So yeah. So a quarter tab, and that was about 4 hours before finals is when I did that.
Yeah. Okay. And you already had a gallon and a half of water in you as well at that point, approximately. So you still had water in the system. It's like you completely pulled everything out and you flattened right out because you had no water left to, you still had some water in there to get rid of. You just weren't holding anything under the skin.
Yeah. And we don't, the water's not cut. So it's the diuretic's in place to start doing its job. So if you're cutting water and adding diuretic, kind of doing a double whammy there. So it's like, well, I'm always still with all this thing, just like talking about training. It's like one variable at a time, so we know what the hell's going on, right? So hey, introduce your diuretic, maybe hold your water the same, so you know if it's how it's working, or you're going to lower water. If you get real good, you can start manipulating multiple variables. But most of the time, the guys that I see doing that don't know what the hell they're.
If you're at the Olympia level and you still don't consider yourself to be at the level where you can do polyvariable adjustments, then who can do polyvariable adjustments?
Well, that just makes you say, like, should you even need to be doing them then, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe the focus has been on the wrong things at the earlier level.
like you look at Lunsford, or we look at Curry, or we look at Big Ramey, like none of these people were dry. So, like nobody, even the Mr. Olympias, have mastered fluid manipulation.
You think a lot of it's, though, it could be, I mean, stress levels might be one show to another, and then it's like a lot of it might be paralysis by analysis. You start trying to, like you said, get that 1%. How much percent are you risking to give up versus maybe you just, if a 97% on look is better than trying to go for a 98 or a 99.
I'll go for 75. If I can come in 75% as good as I look in the gym, I'm happy.
A lot of people ask me because Andrew Vu is my coach now, and a lot of his guys come in peaked very, very well. Everyone's really in shape, and they're like, "Man, what's the secret to his peaking?" And he has a great eye, but really it's his timing. So he keeps people on track very, very well. And so that week before the show, they're just fucking ready and they're skinned out, and so there's really not much left to do. And there's no complicated peaking process of loading water and sodium and manipulating. It's really not. It's very lackluster when you actually see it. It's just giving yourself enough time and getting absolutely peeled, and then some minor adjustments at the end.
If you're in shape, it really doesn't make a difference what you do at that point. You don't have to do much. Yeah.
If you had it done right, you don't change sodium. You cut your water down to half percent, and you don't use a diuretic. Yeah, that's pretty much how John Meadows does it. That's how pretty much everybody does it. The trick is being ready 2 to 4 weeks out, and that's where people don't show up ready.
Well, they come in with dieting was optional the entire time, and then they throw that Hail Mary the last couple days, like, push the water super, super high and then cut it out on Wednesday, and they use every diuretic in the book. Wonder why they look softer than they did, 2 weeks prior to that.
Oh man, I was flat. And, dude, you were still fat.
Exactly. Well, I'm just holding water. No, you're holding fat and water.
Have you noticed with your own clients that, because it seems to me like it's still done, but it's almost like school approach. You pull water the Friday before the show and leave it out for 24 hours. Are you noticing with your own clients that you leave water in more so than you pull it all the way out to a degree?
The longer I've been doing it, the less I have been doing, and usually I've been leaving water in for a longer period of time. But there's just certain people that I can just see it right away that just have, even though they're lean, they just have this water retention. Look, I can just see it, and it's not even a question in my mind where I know like I need to use a diuretic on this person or pull water more aggressively. It's the ones that are like, man, should when you're Friday night and you get your client picture, like, should I use it, or maybe I should use the diuretic? And it's usually, if you're asking that, just don't even do it, because they're going to drop overnight and look tight. So yeah, I find myself much less just doing less aggressive with water. Usually I keep it about the same on Friday, and if I consistently see them waking up looking pretty tight in the morning and I like it, I can just have them wake up and then limit water to stage and just hold that look, and that's perfect. I don't need to try to make them. It's like what I usually see the error is like when people are trying to dry them out Friday night and they look super hard Friday night and perfect, then how they're gonna look in the morning? Probably flat, right? And
right.
So it's like the timing of the waters. Just let them dry out over Friday night, and then just manage water how you need to hold that look.
Well, if you're waking up in the morning, especially from a male, if you're waking up in the morning dry during peak week every single day, and you can tell because the kidneys are tight, right? You don't have anything in the back by the kidneys. You don't have any kind of blurring and stuff. You can see everything in their lower back. If they're waking up dry every single morning, why the fuck would you change anything? Just let it ride.
Yeah.
You're going to add carbs. Those carbs and that sodium are going to bind together. It's going to pull whatever little extra bit of water is under the skin into the muscle cell anyway as you load. So they're going to dry out naturally.
Yeah, that's when especially, I'm sure y'all do it too, getting multiple pictures. So usually I try to see what time are we going to be going on prejudging roughly. for that peak week, how many meals we get in, how much fluid we get in, what's that look like, and let's try to train around that time if we can, just like to simulate that show and pump up. And then how do you look? Like, okay, it is kind of watery, so maybe we should be eyeballing, like we might need to limit water, or maybe it's limiting even carbohydrates. Maybe they don't need much.
Do you find with the ones that you do, you may have to actually use like a diuretic on, that they're more the endomorph type to begin with in the off season?
Typically, trying to think of some weird situation, but I've had some like real mesomorph guys too, but they probably lean to a little bit more endo too. It's the guys that I usually have to crush to get lean. They just hold on to every last bit, or even guys that were used to be really heavy before. Maybe they're not necessarily really fat in the off season anymore, but if they came from a really over fat state, they seem to just have that loose skin water retention that they just need to have a bigger like diuretic or water pool just in general.
I've always wondered with like the more endomorphs and stuff, what if they convert estrogen much more readily than somebody who's would be an ectomorph or a mesomorph, because you're holding more body fat, which it's estrogen. You got fat storage and stuff that goes with estrogen retention in the body. If we think about with females, they're gonna have a much softer, much more fat in certain areas because of estrogen. Then you get these male bodybuilders that are holding more body fat in the off season. Not necessarily ones that are like they just eat everything in sight, because that's different. But like if they are fairly strict with their diet, they're on point with what they're doing, and their body just wants to hold on to the body fat, or it wants to gain fat. As they get bigger, they tend to add more body fat, and then you said you have to crush them to get them down, where the estrogen is maybe more present in the system and it's holding on to a lot more fluid and stuff with the estrogen.
The big point that seals your hypothesis is that the fat cell itself
holds water,
enzyme aromatase. So the more body fat you have, more testosterone gets converted to estrogen. Mm-hmm. It's definite. It's not a possibility, but that's the key concept that actually links your theory to make it reality.
I think within that person too, like if you're someone that has a propensity to just be a higher body fat, you're probably already have a lot of genetic components to you that just cater to being an over fat person, right? So you're probably going to have to push harder too to get down. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's that estrogen component there, but there's probably other genetic components that just way beyond what I even know to control that.
I asked that because I'm one of those people. I'm one of those where I'm going to hold more body fat in the off season no matter what. I mean, it's just, unless I want to be on a prep all year long, I'm not going to stay as lean as somebody as like Tommy or Todd can, because they just that's the genetic components that they can stay a lot leaner than I can in the off season, and I'm the one that has to get crushed to get down. Literally,
polar opposite ends of the spectrum.
I'm that 1,500 calories a day, 2 hours of cardio. We're gonna push hard, and you're gonna have to work your ass off to get that last little bit off. And I hold a lot more fluid coming into the end than Todd does. Or Tommy does.
It's really unfair. It's like I start my prep almost where Keith ends it. 3 times his calories. It's just not fair at all. But he's like 3 times as strong as me too. So
I come from a heavy set family though. Like, when you think about Italians, fat Italians, that's what I come from. So my dad's fat, there's my grandma, that whole side of the family is just big people. And it's just I've always been, even when I was a kid, I was bigger than I wasn't fat, but I was just bigger. I mean, look husky, as you would husky kid. That was me. And as I've gotten older and stuff, obviously, with lifting weights, I stay leaner than I did when I was a kid. But I always have that same. That's why I was asked that if you've seen that, because that's always me, is where I've got to crush it to get down, and then we're holding that last little bit of fluid at the end, and we have to manipulate some variables, some water, and use like a small amount of diuretics to get that dry look on stage on Saturday.
Yeah, another interesting point too, at least off-season wise, with that, because I've had people like that I've tried to like fight to keep them from going back up to that body fat kind of set mm-hmm. point, and I end up feel like they're like running a deficit year round, and it just holds them back from progress. So it's like, if they are going to hold this higher body fat closer to like a 20% mark, but that's productive for them to grow, I say do it, or they just don't make progress, you know?
Yeah. I don't go that high, but I mean, I'm teetering on 12 to 14% in the off season, and that's just my look. That's just where I'm going to be. I'm going to have, you're going to see outline of abs in the front, but you're going to have the back fat back of the kidneys. That's what's all going to store in the back, and that's where it's going to be. And it's just going to sit on my backside. My front will look pretty damn good, and the back is just going to be a fucking utter mess. You see no separation anywhere, and it just looks big, and it's like, oh, okay, that's it. But then when I diet, you know, the front's ready 6-8 weeks out. I'm ready to go, but I'm still fighting the back. That's where we're trying to get everything off the backside. You know, we're trying to get it out of the upper back and out of the glutes and the hamstrings and everything else. And we just got to go to extremes to get there. So that's what I just was asking. I wonder if you had seen that and noticed that with those type of people more than, say, somebody like Todd, who's just walking around, you know, with a 6-pack all year long and doesn't even have to worry about it because he can eat 4,000 calories a day and lose 5 pounds. You know?
I ate 5,200 calories and lost 2 pounds.
I'd gain 10.
202 to 200 a day. And if got like pale and hairy, it's a full 6-pack, if not an 8-pack.
Yeah. I tell you what, I am getting better though, because we did like Justin just pulled. We blasted after the show and got up to like 250, 252, and then back to TRT, right? So it's like, okay, you're going to drop 8 to 10 pounds of water out after everything comes out of you. So I did. I've been holding 240 to 242, 243 for like the last 4 weeks. Well, he's like, okay, we're going to pull back on the diet for the next couple weeks to get you ready again, and then we're going to fucking blast again, going through January. So normally if we do that, we just pull a little bit of food out. I'm not going to see a whole lot of fluctuation in weight. Now, it's been 2 days. He pulled 100 grams of carbs out. It's been 2 days, and I've dropped 7 pounds. So clearly things are getting better for me as I get older than where they used to be, because that would have never happened like 2-3 years ago. Would have dropped 100 grams of carbs, my body would just stayed the same. It would nothing would have happened. We would have had to add cardio and everything else just to get some movement out of the deal.
John, do you think there's like a threshold of like how many calories you can give someone in an off season before it just becomes like, it's like that taking, you know, growth hormone has a point of diminishing returns, right? Like, is there a point of that? How many calories you can really shove at someone? Are we even absorbing the nutrients anymore? I mean, in your experience and your thought, because I assume, were you in that prep where you when you turned pro, were you guys were dropping food every week, but your weight wasn't changing, or were you leaving food alone?
It would vary. Like I had to get pushed down pretty low, not to extremes like you, Keith. I feel like I'm more middle of the road. But I don't get to go super high in the off season either, but I won't go terribly low. So I might start a prep around 3,000, 3,500 calories. Maybe the last 2 weeks I'm down to like 1,400. And maybe that does sound low, but it's like the last 2 weeks, right? Of that's just getting the last bit off. Usually I'm probably cruising around 2,000 for a lot of the duration of the prep. So I've never been one that has to get to a point where I'm just like crushing food like that. I have because I wanted to do the open at one point, and I got really sick and just ended up going back to 212. But beside the point, but I did get to a point in the off season where we tried to push up food higher, and I literally felt like I was gonna puke all day, and it was just the point of like, I can't even do it. Like, it's just not even feasible. So at that point, we're like, hey, just bring food back down. And I think it was a point of like trying to drive up weight way faster than what even I could put on muscle at that rate.
Right.
So I think there is a point when food is just so high, and you probably need to take a step back and maybe bring yourself back into, I hate saying like a maintenance phase or restorative phase or whatever the hell you want to call it, just to bring down total body stress and oxidation and everything, give the GI a break, and then going back into pushing, kind of like what you're doing, Keith. Like, you know, you kind of pull back in food and set yourself up for the next next blast. But
Mhm.
and most people I see, like you'll push food and you see kind of a concomitant weight increase, right? And you get to that point where weight just doesn't equate to what you're seeing on the food volume increase. You increase food and weight doesn't budge, and you keep pushing. And I think at some point you have to just go back and kind of like resensitize in a sense to a lower food amount, and then go back into pushing.
How much of that do you equate to insulin resistance if you're pushing a lot of carbs in the off season?
I have people that monitor blood glucose, especially using growth hormone. I think a lot of it still comes down to like a lot of metabolic adaptation.
Yep.
And then a lot of the guys that I see are usually more ectomorph that are driving food up high, but they're not insulin resistant, and they're also individuals that are still very lean. A few of them are, and there are a few that do use higher amounts of growth hormone. I'm seeing blood glucose trail up, and usually that's people that I'm also having to implement insulin in to manage that blood glucose. And once I'm doing that, usually appetite improves. So if you have guys that are using growth, have high food volumes, and you're seeing blood glucose drive up, if you're already seeing blood glucose drive up, you're already having insulin resistance occurring in the background. So I would be monitoring those things, and you could probably extend that phase out for a bit. But again, just using insulin, you're not correcting the insulin resistance in the background. So that is
No.
probably a point when you need to decide when to pull back and bring growth hormone back down, restore that sensitivity to insulin, and going back into pushing from there.
Yeah, you're not fixing the problem with the insulin. You're just band-aiding it for the time being. It's still there. You're giving the pancreas a little bit of a break, but that's all you're really doing.
So after the guest posing at the end of September, I was already back up to 8 units of insulin a day. And I had not been using insulin, and I was dropping weight just eating the normal amount of food, 4,000 calories a day. Then we started adding in insulin again, approximately 15 to 20 units every other day. And I just got fatter and grosser looking, and nothing else changed. So it was getting the point where it's like, okay, I want to save some money. So we pulled the growth hormone down to 4, and I cut out insulin completely. And then I put it back in at 12 units twice a week. And that's when I started growing. So in other words, for me, it's not a point of diminishing return. It's almost counterproductive using growth to grow beyond a point for me, because the insulin resistance is more inhibitory to anabolism than having a better insulin sensitivity. So 4 units, I was growing better than 8 because the insulin resistance was more counterproductive than the extra growth was productive.
Yeah. Did you actually track your blood sugar levels though at that point to know what they were?
Yeah. Every time I do that, I could take 3 readings in a row and they'll be 150, 40, 100. Like, to me, that the blood sugar measurements are shit when I measure myself in the morning. What I find was my HbA1c this year was 5.5. Last year was 6.0. So I would, as much as that would be nice if it was an accurate measurement, it's like the same thing we talked about with the NEAT being interpreted from steps. It's like, I don't know if a finger prick is really going to tell me what my total blood is like, because I might stab myself 6 or 7 times before I get an actual drop of blood.
I use mine. I can prick myself 3 times in a row, and I'm going to get within a few points. I'm getting the same reading if I'm doing it one after another.
I don't.
Yeah.
I get completely different readings.
Maybe you don't have any blood flow to your hands.
I don't. That was actually Justin said, do you have right now? And I just think I have thick as fuck blood.
No, I'll run my hand underneath the hot water for 30 seconds or whatever, warm that area up, and then just kind of push that spot there and get as much blood flow in there. And I can prick my finger and it just starts running out of my finger at that point. So it's easy to fill up, fill the strip up, and I'm getting good readings no matter what.
I might go through 4 strips just to get one reading in 6.
Yeah.
Remember when I went to get blood drawn, even though I'm covered in vascularity, they couldn't get any blood. I had to go to the gym, hit legs, come back, and she still couldn't get any blood. I'm like, take it from the leg. I put the blood in the leg so you could take it from there. And then she got the leg blood.
Yeah, I've never had any issues with if I've gone and given blood or even just pricking my finger. I've never had issues with that. That's whatever. I clearly, Todd, we've already talked. You have many differences from everybody else. You're the only person I know that has a 500 natural test just walking around, so you don't even use tests. You just use DECA all year round.
Yeah, on 1,000 DECA and a 400 Tren, I had a 500 natural.
Interesting.
Do you stick to primarily just Humalog with guys, or do you introduce Lantus to help with blood sugar control when on GH?
Yeah, so my first insulin will be initiated with Lantus. That'll give the best overall control throughout the everyday and have the least risk, especially for someone that's
new at it,
new to, and there's also I guess the potential that Lantus has some stronger binding on the IGF-1 receptor. That maybe have some extra advantage, maybe not much, but I think Lantus for all day blood glucose control, and mainly that's my main thing with introducing insulin is mainly just blood sugar control and optimizing all the nutrients you're utilizing. I've tried at my hardest to read through every bit of literature on how adding exogenous insulin in place of your endogenous production of insulin has a further advantage of anabolism, right? Because you can't just super physiological dose insulin, because what happens, you would die, right? Not like test. So really the main thing is blood sugar control when using insulin. So for that purpose, Lantus, and then if we have some large meals around training, there might be some Humalog in place around those times. I do think there's a lot that we can do with growth hormone dosing and timing to manage blood glucose more efficiently in the off season.
What do you think is the sweet spot for growth hormone then?
Yeah, for a hypertrophy or fat loss aspect?
For hypertrophy.
Yeah, so there appears to be kind of a ceiling dosage, and this is kind of some rudimentary studies human muscle cell cultures that they're injecting growth hormone into, but it looks like between 7 nanograms per mil and 30 nanograms per mil of growth hormone was to maximize IGF-1 expression. So what do we want within a muscle is growth hormone conversion to IGF-1. IGF-1 is what builds muscle, right?
Right.
So around this dosage range in these muscle cells was what kind of maxed out IGF-1. And if you looked at what human dosages are, that would be roughly what we can just about produce on our own post-training, which is about 2 IUs. So sum that nonsense up. About 2 IUs at one moment in time will max out IGF-1 expression in the muscle. So going beyond that in one dosage, you're probably going to end up with more systemic IGF-1 versus localized, which is not what we want. We don't want just a big serum IGF-1. We want it direct in the muscle. But there also appears to be an overall ceiling dosage for how much total IGF-1 you can do. And that dosage for someone in serum is about 700 nanograms per mil. And we have some individual dosings that I've seen where everyone kind of tops out, even though they're taking 30 IUs of growth hormone around this 700 nanogram per mil. So there's a point where going beyond that just doesn't make much sense. And if 2 IUs at one time maxes out muscle IGF-1 expression, it may be 3 to 4 times throughout the day of this 2 IUs. I think around 4 to 8 IUs per day, you're going to top out what you can get out of growth hormone for hypertrophy purposes.
Okay. So what you're saying, I think, is you want to do doses of 2 units at a time up to 3 or 4 times a day.
Yeah, I think that would be much more ideal than large boluses.
Right.
So they fasted in the morning, pre-training, post-training, before bed?
Yeah, so in order of when I think would be the best importance would be for one pre-bed. One we've shown in studies comparing AM dosages to PM dosages, you actually have a higher GH peak dosing PM. growth hormone appears to have greater bioavailability at nighttime. And if you think about it, it makes sense. When do we have the biggest GH increases? When we're sleeping, right?
When you're sleeping, yeah.
So there is something to that. You can so a dosage in the PM would make the most sense. Then definitely one post training, because you already have a big peak then. I think the next order of importance, if you could afford another dosage, would be probably maybe 4 hours before that dosage pre-training, and then the last order I would probably say
first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
All right, that's interesting because that's exactly backwards of what I thought it was, but I really I've noticed anecdotally I've gotten better results when I do it that way.
I used to do it just all in the morning, and because I was thinking like from this fat loss partitioning aspect, but which growth hormone fast in the morning from a fat loss aspect, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. You go do some fasted cardio.
Right.
There is a max dosage too for fat loss, and that still is probably around 1.5 to 2 IUs.
Yeah. Okay.
But if you're in the off season and you're not in a deficit, it just makes sense that we really focus more on IGF-1 expression, and where you're going to get the most out of that is like pre-bed or around training, then another time. And there is, after one dosage of GH to give you another dosage, there is a desensitization that occurs. And so you do need some type of insulin rise between this dosage, and that resensitizes. It's the Jack stack pathways is how GH expression works. And but basically insulin resensitizes this pathway to GH IGF-1 expression. So just having a meal between your dosaging doesn't mean you need to go take insulin, but having like carbohydrate meals and then having your dosage spread out 4 to 5 hours apart throughout the day, that would probably be the best to get the best IGF-1 all day long.
So back to the
Makes
original
sense.
point of the Lantus, what you've got is a baseline amount of insulin that's going to guarantee resensitization to the GH anyway, if you were to have without carb spiking. Is that correct?
I think you would still need some greater spike. Like I don't have an answer because we don't, like, there's nothing I've read to indicate that. There needs to be probably like a greater spike, like a meal, and just your endogenous production of insulin for that meal. Or if you're using some like Humalog with that meal would probably be enough. I don't think because your Lantus is just replacing your basal insulin level, right? So you probably need a rise that's beyond your basal level to resensitize that pathway. So I don't know if you would be accomplishing that enough with the Lantus, but the issue that we have bodybuilding using growth hormone is this higher blood glucose all day long and insulin resistance all day long. So Lantus would have the best coverage for that.
Back to your original point. So let's say someone's going to finish their workout at 8 p.m. So they're going to have a post-workout high-carb meal at 8:30 p.m. Should they be having their GH at 4 and 8, or should they be having their GH at 5 and 9?
Right. So I would probably do 5 and 9.
Okay, so you do your GH workout post meal, not pre-post meal.
Yeah, I still think having that. I think pre-bed you're going to have the biggest response with IGF-1 in recovery, and if you had one post workout and then that close to bed, that's timing is probably a little bit too close.
Oh, I usually go to bed at 7 a.m., so I wasn't even thinking like that.
Oh, okay. Okay, well then I mean, yeah.
I think, but taking it at night though, you still, I mean, because you haven't done anything, you've been sleeping all night, you're going to have a lot of that growth hormone still floating around in your system, even if you're up at like 5 or 6 in the morning doing cardio anyway. So almost taking another 2 units in the morning pre-cardio if you were prepping would kind of like be kind of overkill at that point, wouldn't it? You haven't done anything really to move anything other than sleep.
Yeah. I think you might still have that time component because you're probably looking at maybe 8 to 9 hours between dosaging. And that's probably long enough to where you could justify doing another dosage because I think with GH, you get a peak within about 60 minutes, and probably within 4 to 6 hours, you're going to have it completely dropping off. And full IGF-1 is going to be in the bloodstream for a long period of time. But as far as just rising, I think it's 24 to 36 hours, you can have IGF-1 elevated. So just for getting the GH itself is what we want for fat loss. So I think it still makes sense to have a rise pre-cardio. If you're doing it like in a contest prep for fat loss, I think pre-bed and then pre-cardio would have probably the best application.
Okay.
And then I would definitely you could set up a whole an awesome fat loss stack, because the synergies between growth hormone and anabolics and clenbuterol and thyroid are pretty phenomenal. They all work awesome together. So doing all that before you're doing your fasted cardio is setting up to be just a fat mobilizing and oxidizing machine.
Do you think there's a correlation between off-season eating and the amount of peds you're using? So I've just thought about this with myself, and you guys can give me your own thoughts, but if training intensity is high, we obviously have inflammation buildup. Food's high, we have more inflammation buildup than versus prep, where we're working our way down into a deficit. So should gear use really be, if it's going to be minimal, it should be in the off season, since toxicity is already so high from food and training? I wonder if that causes, for me anyway, a bigger issue absorbing the amount of food. Because I push over 7,000 calories a day. I'm a true ectomorph. I have to eat, and I stay lean. I do no cardio other than like little brisk walks 3 to 4 times a day before my meals. I'm currently using the least amount of gear I've used in the off season. I'm noticing I'm finally able to get through 7,000 calorie days without, going to bed feeling like I'm going to burst or feeling like I'm dry heaving all day. So I just wonder if there's a correlation between toxicity from gear, food, and training. And if we can push gear more in our prep because our food's getting lower and lower and lower, that toxicity isn't there. It's like they're trading places. It's just a thought I've had recently. I have nothing to back it. It's just something I've thought about. Because I've just wondered, when it comes to pushing food, I'm like, how much more can I really shove in my face? Because my weight really doesn't change. It goes up a little bit progressively through each year, but it's not like I'm gaining, 20 pounds in an off season. I'm literally jumping 10 pounds a year. I can remember what it was like to get to 200 pounds finally. And I was red in the face tying my shoes, and I couldn't breathe half the day. And then I remember 210, I remember 220, and now I'm just my new benchmark. I'm just now at 250, and I'm finally starting to get used to that. But my off-season gear use is literally the same amount it was when I was 210 to 220 at 250. So I just wonder if there's a correlation between if it's toxicity related.
We could be with
we don't need to push that much gear in the off season if you're hard and you're pushing your food.
I've seemed to use less and less as now you have to take that for what it's worth, because I'm still a 212 competitor, so I'm not jumping up weight classes here. There's some thought on increased inflammation, like you're saying. I think because in just people using anabolics, there's a tendency to store more visceral fat, and visceral fat tends to increase inflammatory cytokine production. While inflammatory cytokines have a hypertrophy effect, right? So when you train, there's an inflammatory reaction that takes place, and it's localized, and it does promote growth. But having this systemic inflammatory signaling occurring, potentially maybe you could impede localized signaling, but so much systemic signaling occurring, and it could impede hypertrophy progress. That's just me talking,
No.
And that maybe, to where you're less productive. But I think having a high inflammatory state is probably the root cause of a lot of our disease conditions, like insulin resistance. Are you getting insulin resistant from just lots of carbs, or is it because you're inducing inflammation, and that inflammation is what is the root cause of insulin resistance occurring, and a lot of the oxidation that's occurring, and then poor health is occurring, and you're not going to grow if you're not healthy.
Right.
That makes sense. I've thought about that recently because I've just been shoveling food for 3 years.
Well, I mean, how many orals are you on? Any orals in the off season?
All of them.
Yeah, all of them.
The only one I can use is Anavar. D-ball, Anadrol, T-ball, they all
destroy your appetite.
I can get maybe a couple weeks, and then it's more risk versus reward just isn't there. So
yeah,
Anavar I'm fine on, but honestly, it's
I love Anavar.
Test EQ or Test Primo. That's pretty much it for drugs in the off season. I've Tren, same thing. I already don't sleep a lot, so if Tren's gonna affect that, what's the point of taking it in the off season? I just want to keep toxicity as low as I can in my body.
Yeah, I've never understood Tren in the off season. It's like the whole purpose of the off season and growing is being able to sleep, and I can't. The same way I cannot sleep. I'm up. I don't care what I do. I'm gonna get 3 hours of sleep, and it's in shifts, and that is it. I'm either sweating through the sheets, or I'm up pissing every 20 minutes. If I'm using Tren, it's you got the anxiety that goes with it and stuff. And it doesn't take very much for some people like myself. Anything more than a couple 100 milligrams of Tren, and I'm a wreck. I can't do it. So I have to save it for just prep because I already know I'm not going to sleep anyway from being hungry all the time.
I'm on 40 milligrams a day of Tren, and I slept 10 hours last night.
You are just completely opposite of everybody else.
200 milligrams of Tren a day. I slept just fine.
Yeah, I'm saying I'm just sustain on an EQ in the off season. That's it. That's my go-to. If I start a blast, it's we'll use some Anadrol or some D-ball, but it's not for more than a couple of weeks because any longer than that, my appetite's destroyed. So what's the point of doing it?
Yeah, I'm definitely a test base up to the level you can handle for aromatization.
Yep.
Introducing a DHT along with it to modulate androgens to estrogens and increase anabolism in a stack. And then from there, if you need more, nandrolone. And that's kind of the basis. So I like Test Primo Nandrolone. That's how I like kind of stack design. And I'm in agreement. Like Trenbolone, I think it's awesome for decreasing protein degradation and what it does and interference with the glucocorticoid receptor. And so it just makes a lot of sense to use it on prep, right? I don't think it's as great of a muscle builder as some of the other compounds that we have that aromatize more, like Test and Nandrolone. So, and you're right, guys. I mean, if your appetite's low and Tren, then it's kind of defeating the purpose of what you're trying to do in the off-season.
If you're not sleeping, you're not recovering, right?
Yeah. I
mean, that's the basis of your recovery is getting enough rest for your body to regenerate and then being able to recover from training. And if you're not getting enough sleep, then you're not. I mean, your body's just gonna be stressed out. You're not gonna actually recover from anything.
All right, I will try it. I'm gonna cut my Tren in half, turn down to 20, and I'll turn my DECA up. So
DECA up. You're gonna go higher than 1,000 DECA a week.
Well, last year I was at 1,400 DECA a week, and I was at 140 Tren a week. The Tren was there just because you don't get DHT out of DECA like you do out of Test. So it was there, but I want to be as cool as a cucumber. I'm not anxious, but I'm a little ragey, and I'm going to just cut it down. I'm going to cut my Tren in half, and we'll see how much more I can sleep. If I can sleep 14 hours a day every day.
Well, I mean, what if you added in Primobolan, then added some Provirone for the DHT component?
Yeah. I know what I use Anavar too. I use 25 to 50 milligrams a day of Anavar.
Oh, there's your DHT.
I don't know. I guess the androgen receptor activity of Provirone is supposed to be pretty minimal. It just really is there to mop up SHBG because I have no estrogen. My SHBG is a 2, so I don't really need Provirone or Masteron to bind to the SHBG.
No, I thought you meant maybe from a libido aspect or something like that. Or
no, it's just no, because my girlfriend's sex drive is so high. It doesn't matter how much drugs I take, I'll never keep on. She's a fucking maniac. So This is
It don't matter.
it's fucking ridiculous. It's just only gonna have to be Cialis or just whatever.
You guys got anything else? Okay. All right. I'm sure you got to go eat, man. Being 4 weeks out, you got to be starving by now.
Yeah, I'm just about to pass out. No.
Yeah, you're good.
I'm good.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I really do.
This is good.
Yeah, we'll do this again after. Maybe we could do it again after the Olympia.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks for having me on. I love the conversation.
Yeah. So for Tommy Styles, Todd Lee, John Jewett, I'm Keith Fabry. This has been episode number 77 of the Weekly Grind podcast, sponsored by Valhalla Labs at valhalla-labs.com and Kodiak Bodybuilding Apparel at kodiakbodybuilding.com, where they always ship everything for free. And then we'll be back next week. I forgot who we got on next week.
Right?
Huh?
It's Jose Ramon.
Jose is December 2nd. We're gonna have Jose Raymond on. I don't remember who I have for next week necessarily. I've got it all scheduled out all the way through December now.
Doing a good job, producer.
Yeah, thanks. Shit happens. Every once in a while I stumble upon something, I do something well. It sure as fuck isn't bodybuilding. So
I disagree. You're a phenomenal.
Yeah, fuck off. Anyway, so
Good luck at the O, John.
Thank you.
yeah, good luck, man. That's we'll be watching. So, all right, appreciate it, man. Go get some food because I know you need it at this point. I know how it is being 4 weeks out. We all do.
Yeah, right on, guys. Well, thanks a lot again.
Thanks
All
for
right.
coming.
See you guys.